Controlling the tongue. We are to control what we say so that we can be peacemakers rather than those who create chaos and confusion. Here's Gene.
Chapter 15 here in Proverbs begins with a powerful statement about the tongue. Here's what we read. A gentle answer turns away anger, but a harsh word stirs up wrath. How many times have you seen that happen? I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen on the highway. I've seen it happen, for example, when I've cut somebody off, and boy, are they angry. But one of the first things that I try to do as they're passing me with rude gestures is to apologize and say, I'm sorry. By the way, they can lip read. And I've seen people literally, immediately, when you respond and say, I'm sorry, immediately they change. And they say, gesturing, that's okay. That's okay. How incredible this truth is. A gentle answer turns away anger, but a harsh word stirs up wrath. We could use many, many illustrations of that in our lives. Doesn't always work, but thankfully, in many instances, it does. I remember another situation that I was in when I was visiting a seminary in another city, staying in a motel. I had a car that belonged to the seminary. And I got confused coming out of the driveway, and lo and behold, I ended up in the middle of the street right in front of an oncoming car. And I still remember the look at this guy. Boy, you know those things, it happens in a flash, but it's like slow motion. And I saw the look on his face as he deliberately came right towards my car, put on his brakes, did a complete 180 around me and is looking at me from the other way. Then he gets out of his car and is coming over to give me a piece of his mind and who knows what else. Now, I was at fault. And I remember demonstrating that probably with my behavior sitting there in that car seat. And I rolled down the window a little bit, and the first words that came out of my mouth is, I'm sorry. And I said, I'm a stranger in the city, and I didn't realize the street began where it began, running into this parking lot, and I'm really, really sorry. I've never seen a person change so quickly. He just dropped his head, and he said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And he walked away, got in his car, and drove away. Now, I figured out later that he saw on the side of the car an emblem that mentioned the seminary. And I think I had tapped into some of his anger, probably towards seminary students in that community. Not saying the seminary students were wrong, but perhaps he was angry at them for even trying to share the gospel with him. And here I'm in this car, driving out in the middle of the street and engaging in this irresponsible behavior. And so it possibly was a flow over his anger towards the seminary generally, and I was specifically the object. I don't know. That's just my perception. But the fact is, in that case, thankfully, a gentle answer turns away anger, but a harsh word stirs up wrath. Now, as you read through the Proverbs, we have a number of statements that really build on that concept here in chapter 15. For example, Proverbs 15:2. The tongue of the wise makes knowledge attractive, but the mouth of fools blurts out foolishness. Boy, think about that. We can all identify with it periodically when we look back at some of the things we've said or done. Proverbs 15:4. The tongue that heals is a tree of life, but a devious tongue breaks the spirit. Boy, when I think of that one, I remember sitting at McDonald's one day, ordered a hamburger I was eating, and right over about 10 feet away from me was a mother and her children. And I don't know what happened, but The little boy, I would say he's probably around 7 years old, 8 maybe, had done something and spilled something or whatever, but I've never heard such a vitriolic response on that little guy. I mean, it was horrible. And I watched him. And as I watched him, he'd bend his head down like this. He was horribly embarrassed, for one thing, but he was trying to get away from the verbal abuse. And by the way, at that point in time, I was getting angry myself. I didn't get involved, but I was getting angry. If it had gone further, I probably wouldn't have I'd gotten involved or something, especially if it became brutal. But then they left. They walked out. And the abuse continued. And I still remember watching through the glass, I could see and I could hear her shouting at this little guy out there in the parking lot. And I saw literally how he was trying to get away from this horrible abuse. And then, believe it or not, she said, "Look at me. Look at me." And he tried to raise his head to look into a really horrible looking face as she continued to verbally abuse him. Now, when I think of an illustration like that, and it's horrible, but the tongue that heals is a tree of life, but a devious tongue breaks the spirit. And how powerful that is in relationship, particularly to our children. Not that they don't need discipline, but that's abuse. And this woman's anger was out of control, and this little boy was the object of her anger, her out-of-control feelings. Here's another one, Proverbs 15:7. The lips of the wise broadcast knowledge, but not so the heart of fools. Think about that one. Proverbs 15:18. A hot-tempered man stirs up conflict, but a man slow to anger calms strife. In the New Testament, James, who was the half-brother of Jesus, who became the lead pastor or elder in the church in Jerusalem after the church was born, later wrote a letter. It's one of the first letters that's written, probably, that's included in our New Testament, the book of James. We shouldn't confuse that James with the brother of John, the son of Zebedee. This is James, the half-brother of Jesus. And in his letter, he wrote these words. Now when we put bits into the mouth of horses to make them obey us, we also guide the whole animal. And here he uses a simile or a metaphor of the horse and how you can control that horse with a bit. And then he says, and consider ships, these huge ships. They're very large and driven by fierce winds. They're guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So too, though the tongue is a small part of the body, it boasts great things. Consider how large a forest a small fire ignites. Boy, have we seen that happen. Just a small fire can take out a whole forest. And here's the application that James makes. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue, a world of unrighteousness, is placed among the parts of our bodies. It pollutes the whole body, sets the course of life on fire, and is set on fire by hell. In other words, the use of the tongue in this kind of vitriolic way is right out of the pit of hell. That's how serious this problem is. I think that perhaps James was thinking of the Proverbs because of what he wrote in verse 13 of chapter 3, because it sounds so much like the Proverbs, and particularly the opening chapters of Proverbs dealing with wisdom. Who is wise and understanding among you? He should show his works by good conduct with wisdom's gentleness. wisdom's gentleness. A powerful reference to what wisdom really is, and in this case applied particularly to the way we communicate, the way we use the tongue. Reflection response question: how can losing control of our speech when we're angry lead to trouble in our lives? Well, there are many applications, obviously, on this, and I've shared several already. But what I've seen is just a couple of observations, particularly as leaders. And that is that when we lose control, when we belittle people, when we use our tongue in a vitriolic fashion, particularly publicly or with other people, with employees, with other relationships, what happens is we lose trust and confidence in those individuals. I saw that happen to a friend of mine who had a very responsible position as being a leader over a large faculty of individuals. But on several occasions, I saw him lose his temper in front of that whole faculty. And he was noted to have a short fuse. But I also saw what happened to the faculty's confidence in this individual because he couldn't control his temper, because of the way he expressed his feelings in a public way. So I think that's one of the things that can happen to us, when we don't control the tongue and maintain this kind of positive behavior. Another thing that I've noted here is that people that are hot-tempered, and particularly in leadership roles, become intimidating. What happens is that people recoil, people talk behind their backs, they don't tell them what they're feeling because they're intimidated, they're fearful, but they're going to express it, and it turns into backbiting sometimes in an inappropriate way, but it's predictable. And the other thing that happens is that I've seen people tell those individuals what they want to hear rather than telling them the truth. In other words, they're fearful. And so consequently, all the person with that anger tendency hears is what they want to hear, not what they ought to hear. Now, there are many practical aspects to this question, but it's a very important principle. And here is that principle. Let me restate it. We're to control what we say so that we can be peacemakers rather than those who create chaos and confusion.